Welcome to the feminist lecture, another lecture of feminist economics. This lecture is on the historical development of gender roles. Uh, Basically, what we will do in this lecture is we will look both, kind of deep into history to see um, how the gender roles have developed from the earliest phases. And then we will see how the gender roles and the capitalist system interact with each other. And there we will have specific look to the family and role of the family in that through that process. And finally, we will also try to look kind of a more empirical paper on the way participation of the labor force, women to labor force, has changed um, throughout the history of capitalism, or whether there is a trend in that. So it's kind of a both historical and also empirical paper. Um, there was another paper which I have assigned for this topic, which was the paper of Engels, actually, from the book of Engels on gender, but I don't cover it in the lecture because topics are more or less covered here in other three articles, and especially if you take Marxian economics, basically there I covered that paper. So in this lecture, I decided to cover different papers since I had to eliminate some one paper for this course, and I think three papers together make a consistent lecture. As a starting point, I have a video on Lowell Mill girls. This is an interesting case at the dawn of capitalism in United States, where basically it was difficult to find labor force for the newly built factories. A specific factory, Lowell Mill, which was, I believe, producing the textile products, tried to attract girls and tried to promote itself as an educational facility for girls, and basically it takes girls. It was advertising to take girls who were not married, and kind of, I mean, the mill has also created activities like poetry, writing, and reading, for example, and girls were staying in dormitory, and dormitories have dormitory mothers, for example. Um, that's an interesting story, and basically how girls were initially taken into that industry as industrial workers, and then how the Lowell Mill employment, at least the employment of young women there, has ended as interesting story, which you can connect also what we will see in this in the papers we are going to cover today. So I leave it to you to watch the video. So I pass it now. So these are our three articles: Capitalism, Patriarchy, and Job Segregation by Hartman, Family Matters, Reproducing Gender Division of Labor, that's Feiner and Barker, and U-shaped female force, labor force in economic development and economic history, that's Golding. Hartman is a relatively older article. The other ones are relatively more closer. Still, they are not that close. And Hartman actually goes a lot of back than the other articles, and she kind of is defensive to the argument that capitalism has actually been a force that strengthened patriarchy. Her argument is that it's not patriarchy. I mean, capitalism is not an inherent thing that is actually created patriarchy, and in many cases, actually, the patriarchal structure of the within the capitalist system also doesn't come from the capital and basically the employers and necessity of the way capital expands. It comes from the workers, basically, in many ways. But when it comes from the workers, then the capital is also make use of it, and it use it to both lower the wages and the wages and the working conditions of the female workers, but it also use it to bid female workers against the male workers whenever they need to lower the labor cost. They can use always the female workers. So the main arguments are patriarchy precedes capitalism. She goes back in history and she discusses it in her article. Relation between gender division of labor and patriarchy is not clear. Ultimately, it becomes central to the patriarchy. So initially, well, even in the earliest societies, I mean, you have some division or gender division of labor. Women and men are doing somehow different tasks, even though they might substitute for those tasks. However, that division doesn't necessarily create always patriarchy. But once a society gets developed, division of labor and patriarchy become interrelated, both in pre-capitalist societies and the capitalist societies, according to Hartman. So, the beginning. In the beginning, basically, basically, there are different views. One view is separate but equal beginning. Basically, women and men had separate tasks, separate roles, but they were equal in society. And Hartman is pretty much also is believing in that. Different elements of gender division of labor and patriarchy developed separately and started from very beginning. That's the other argument, the argument that's opposed to this. Starting from very beginning, it is universal and gave superiority to the man. Basically, this is also man is culture. Man is more close to what is built above nature, and woman is more close to nature itself. I mean, the pure nature, and basically civilization is superiority of culture over nature, which gives the man the superiority. And even in the early societies, that superiority over culture over nature existed to some extent, which gives man to some superiority. So women are more close to pure nature, and characteristics of pure nature exist in the woman's character according to this, or woman's role according to this view. Again, separate but equal beginning, different roles, but they had equal importance. And the third one is basically at different, gender division of labor and patriarchy kind of were semi-dependent, but different factors that are strengthening gender division of labor and patriarchy, they have developed separately, and maybe then they have interconnected with each other. So at early stages, there is no necessarily direct relation between those two. Hartman pretty much takes the second argument, I believe. She cites a study of Kung people in Africa, and well, the way they had the nomadic life, basically, and in that nomadic life, well, the family as we know it did not exist actually. Many women and men were living together and at the same house, and the basically the tasks of man and woman were interchangeable. Man could do female tasks, female could do the male tasks, basically. And if there's even though there was pairing, I mean there was wife and husband in strict sense, if they had any kind of conflict, the society itself could solve that problem together. So the people around the husband and wife are also dealing with the problems they are experiencing. In that setting, Hartman claims there was no clear male superiority. Basically, man and woman had equal influence in the decision-making process of the society, and also women had also autonomy, which means their life or their behavior is not more controlled by man than male life and male behavior is controlled by the society or the woman. So it was a more or less equal society with where female and male status was more equal to each other. And then the same researchers have come back years later, and as a result of European colonization, basically, the villages from the traditional African setting had become more like traditional European villages with houses in which wife, husband, and their children start to live, and they become more connected to the outside world, and as a result, this initial separation of woman and man into the separate living space has immediately created some gender hierarchy. The most important aspect of that gender hierarchy is the man started to create, to assume the property as theirs. Previously, when private and public sphere was integrated in the small society of the Kung people, the fact that the type of labor that was done by the man and woman was not that different. The status created by that work was not different. But as private and public spheres were created, man was more involved with the public sphere, and women the traditional division of labor that existed before now forced women to stay more in the private sphere. And that private sphere is, leave women without contact with outside world, and within that outside world, as men connect with other households economically more strongly with the other households, since the main economic businesses done for the household outside of the private sphere is done by men, a man started to take ownership of the household in that public sphere. So, we will speak more on this topic in the next part.